On the night of October 17, 2003, the Desert Monarch Casino in Las Vegas lost $6.8 million in cash and gold without a single alarm being triggered. The theft occurred during peak operating hours, with hundreds of guests on the floor and dozens of security cameras recording every angle of the property. Yet somehow, in the span of less than 4 hours, a fortune disappeared from one of the most heavily monitored environments in the world. The perpetrator was discovered in the most unlikely of places, surrounded by bundled cash and gold bars, in a location that seemed impossible for such a massive theft. The man found with the money was Devin Lattimore, a 52-year-old janitor who had worked at the casino for 11 years. But as investigators would soon discover, the story of how the money vanished was far more complex than anyone initially imagined, and Devin's role in the heist would challenge everything security experts thought they knew about casino theft. The case exposed catastrophic failures in what was supposed to be an impenetrable security system and forced the entire gaming industry to rethink how they protected their assets. What happened that October night would become required study material at casino security training programs across the country, a cautionary tale of complacency, blind spots, and the dangerous assumption that constant surveillance equals constant protection. The Desert Monarch heist remains one of the most audacious casino thefts in Nevada history. Not because of violence or elaborate technology, but because of how easily millions of dollars slipped through the cracks of a system designed to prevent exactly that kind of loss. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Desert Monarch Casino stood on the northern end of the Las Vegas Strip, a mid-tier property that catered to serious gamblers rather than tourists. Built in 1989, the casino featured 250 table games, 1,800 slot machines, and a high-limit room that regularly saw six-figure bets placed on single hands of baccarat. The property generated roughly $400 million in annual gaming revenue, which meant that on any given night, millions of dollars in cash moved through its counting rooms, vaults, and cashier cages. The casino's security infrastructure was considered state-of-the-art for its time. 340 cameras monitored every square foot of public space, with feeds transmitted to a central surveillance room staffed 24 hours a day. The vault system operated on dual authentication protocols, requiring 2 separate managers with individual codes to access the main cash reserve. Armed security guards escorted all cash movements between the vault, counting rooms, and gaming floor. Electronic logs tracked every bill that entered or left the casino's financial ecosystem. On paper, the Desert Monarch was a fortress. Devin Lattimore had become invisible at the Desert Monarch long before October 2003. He started working there in May 1992, hired as part of the overnight janitorial crew that cleaned the casino after the heaviest foot traffic subsided. Devin worked the graveyard shift, 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 5 nights a week. His responsibilities included restroom maintenance, trash removal, floor cleaning in non-gaming areas, and general upkeep of employee corridors. He was quiet, reliable, and unremarkable. In 11 years, he had never called in sick, never complained, never drawn attention to himself in any way. Devin had grown up in North Las Vegas, the youngest of 4 children raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the family housed and fed. He dropped out of high school at 17 to help with bills, taking whatever work he could find in the service industry. By his 30s, he had settled into janitorial work, discovering that he preferred the solitude of overnight shifts to the chaos of daytime employment. He married at 28, divorced at 35, and lived alone in a small apartment near Fremont Street. His life was defined by routine and anonymity. But Devin was also drowning in debt. His ex-wife had left him with substantial credit card obligations and a second mortgage on a house they had purchased together and lost in the divorce settlement. By 2001, he owed nearly $80,000 to various creditors, and his overnight janitor salary of $22,000 a year barely covered his rent and minimum payments. Collection agencies called constantly. He had filed for bankruptcy once already and couldn't do it again. The financial pressure had become suffocating, a weight that crushed any hope he had for a stable future. What Devin possessed that made him dangerous was patience and an extraordinary capacity for observation. Over 11 years of wandering the Desert Monarch's back corridors and employee-only spaces at night, he had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of the casino's operations. He knew which cameras had blind spots created by structural columns or poor mounting angles. He knew which doors had faulty locks that didn't fully engage. He knew the exact timing of security patrol routes and how those routes changed depending on which supervisor was working. He knew that surveillance operators focused almost exclusively on the gaming floor and high-value areas, treating back-of-a-house spaces as low priority. Most importantly, Devin had noticed something that no one else seemed to consider significant. The men's restroom in the far western corridor of the casino, located near the employee break rooms and administrative offices, sat in a unique position relative to the vault access route. Twice per shift, armored car services picked up or delivered cash to the Desert Monarch. The route from the loading dock to the vault passed directly through a secured hallway that ran parallel to the restroom facilities. Devin had observed this countless times while emptying trash cans and mopping floors. What made this observation critical was a quirk in the casino's construction. The wall separating the secured cash corridor from the public restroom was original to the 1989 build, constructed before modern security standards required reinforced barriers in areas adjacent to financial operations. The wall was standard drywall over metal studs, not the concrete and steel that protected the vault itself. Devin had discovered this detail while making a repair to a soap dispenser in 1997. When he accidentally punched through the wall behind the mounting bracket and felt hollow space on the other side. For months after his discovery, Devin did nothing. He simply continued his work, watching and learning. He began to pay closer attention to the cash handling procedures, noting when large movements occurred and how security responded. He learned that the busiest cash transfer nights were Fridays and Saturdays, when the casino needed to replenish table game reserves and vault weekend receipts. He noticed that during these high-volume periods, security focused on protecting the money in motion, not the empty spaces adjacent to it. By early 2003, Devin had developed the outline of a plan. It was not sophisticated or high-tech. It relied entirely on timing, distraction, and the exploitation of assumptions. The plan required him to breach the wall between the restroom and the cash corridor during a narrow window when a large cash movement was occurring, quickly transfer as much currency and gold as possible into the restroom, conceal it, and then wait. The audacity of the plan was that he would hide in plain sight, remaining inside the restroom where he was found, gambling that the chaos of discovery would focus attention on him rather than on how the money had actually been moved. Devin spent months acquiring the tools he would need without raising suspicion. He purchased a battery-powered reciprocating saw from a pawn shop, paying cash. He bought heavy-duty garbage bags, duct tape, and work gloves from different hardware stores across the city, never buying multiple items from the same location. He practiced cutting through drywall in his apartment, timing how quickly he could create an opening large enough to pass bundled cash through. He conditioned himself to work quickly in confined spaces, rehearsing movements until they became automatic. The psychological burden of planning a major theft while maintaining his normal routine began to wear on Devin. He lost weight, barely sleeping during his off hours. He stopped socializing with the few coworkers he occasionally spoke to, withdrawing further into himself. But he also felt something he had not experienced in years, a sense of purpose and control. For the first time since his financial collapse began, he was taking action rather than passively accepting his circumstances. The moral dimensions of what he was planning troubled him less than he expected. He rationalized that the casino generated millions in profit from people's gambling losses, and that his theft would barely register as a line item in their quarterly earnings. By October 2003, Devin had decided he was ready. He chose October 17th, a Friday night when the casino would be conducting one of its largest cash replenishments of the month. He had observed this particular transfer pattern for 3 consecutive months and knew exactly what to expect. The armored car would arrive at 1:15 in the morning. The transfer would take approximately 45 minutes. Security would be concentrated on the loading dock, the cash corridor, and the vault entrance. Surveillance would be watching the money, not the bathroom. The night of October 17th began like any other shift for Devin Lattimore. He arrived at the Desert Monarch at 10:45, changed into his work uniform in the employee locker room, and collected his janitorial cart from the supply closet. The casino floor was crowded with weekend gamblers, slot machines chiming and dealers shuffling cards at packed tables. Devin pushed his cart through the public spaces, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces, exchanging nods with security guards who had seen him perform the same tasks hundreds of times before. At 11:30, he began his restroom maintenance route, starting with the facilities nearest the main gaming floor before working his way toward the back-of-house areas. He moved methodically, cleaning mirrors, restocking paper products, mopping floors. Surveillance cameras tracked his movements, but the operators in the control room paid him no particular attention. Devin was part of the background, expected and unremarkable. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Devin entered the Western Corridor restroom, the one adjacent to the secured cash route. He had placed an out-of-order sign on one of the stalls earlier in his shift, a common occurrence that required no explanation. He entered that stall, locked the door, and waited. He wore dark clothing underneath his janitorial uniform and had concealed the reciprocating saw and other tools inside a maintenance bag at the bottom of his cart. His heart hammered in his chest, but his hands remained steady. At 1:12, Devin heard the distinct sound of the loading dock door opening in the distance, the metallic clang echoing through the employee corridors. The armored car had arrived early. He took 3 deep breaths, pulled on his work gloves, and retrieved the saw from his bag. The wall behind the toilet was exactly where he remembered it, hidden from the restroom's surveillance camera by the stall partition. He pressed his ear against it and heard voices on the other side, security personnel preparing to escort the cash transfer. At 1:17, the transfer began. Devin heard the rumble of wheeled carts moving through the corridor, the murmur of radio communication between guards. He powered on the saw, the battery-operated motor producing a high-pitched whine that he hoped would be absorbed by the ambient noise of casino operations. He cut into the drywall at floor level, working quickly but carefully, creating a rectangular opening approximately 2 feet wide and 18 inches tall. The blade tore through the material easily, confirming his belief that the wall was standard construction. Within 4 minutes, Devin had removed a section of drywall large enough to see into the cash corridor. He lay flat on the restroom floor and peered through the opening. The corridor was temporarily empty, the security team having moved ahead toward the vault entrance with the first load of cash. But Devin could see what they had left behind. a second-wheeled cart positioned against the wall approximately 6 feet from his opening, waiting for the guards to return and transport it forward. The cart was loaded with shrink-wrapped bundles of currency and several small wooden crates that Devin recognized as gold bar containers, likely being transferred from the armored car's inventory to the casino's reserve. Devin had perhaps 90 seconds before the guards returned. He squeezed through the opening he had created, the rough edges of cut drywall scraping his shoulders. Once in the corridor, he moved to the cart and began grabbing bundles of cash, passing them back through the hole into the restroom. Each bundle weighed roughly 2 pounds and represented $50,000 in mixed denominations. He worked with desperate speed, his breath coming in short gasps, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the air-conditioned chill of the corridor. He managed to transfer 14 cash bundles and 3 of the small gold crates before he heard voices approaching. Devin dove back through the opening, pulling his tools and bags with him, and immediately began replacing the drywall section. He used duct tape to hold it in place, working from the restroom side where the repair would be less visible. His hands shook as he smoothed the tape, trying to make the patch as seamless as possible. From the corridor side, the modification would be obvious under close inspection, but Devin was betting that no one would inspect it. Not until it was too late. He heard the guards return to collect the cart. There was a moment of silence, then confused voices. Someone had noticed that items were missing. Devin froze, pressed against the stall wall, certain he would hear alarms or lockdown announcements. But instead, he heard one guard say something to another about a count discrepancy, followed by radio chatter about checking the loading dock manifest. The guards moved on, pushing the partially emptied cart toward the vault, apparently assuming the missing items were a documentation error that would be resolved during the reconciliation process. Devin sat in the locked stall, surrounded by $6.8 million in cash and gold, and tried to control his breathing. The first phase of his plan had worked. The money was in the restroom. But now came the second phase, which was in many ways more dangerous than the theft itself. He needed to wait. The casino's security protocols required that any major discrepancy in cash handling trigger an immediate investigation, but that investigation would focus on the transfer chain, not on adjacent spaces. Devin knew from years of observation that the first response would be to review surveillance footage of the loading dock and cash corridor, interview the armored car crew and security guards, and recount all money in the vault. This process typically took 2 to 3 hours. During that time, Devin planned to remain hidden in the restroom, gambling that security would not immediately search ancillary areas. His plan had a fatal flaw that he had not fully considered. By remaining in the restroom with the money, he was effectively trapping himself. He had no exit strategy beyond hoping that the investigation would somehow miss him, and he could eventually remove the cash from the casino during a subsequent shift. It was a plan born of desperation rather than criminal sophistication, and it began to unravel almost immediately. At 2:30 in the morning, surveillance operators in the security control room noticed something unusual. One of the restroom cameras showed a stall that had been occupied for over an hour, the gap beneath the door revealing a pair of feet that had not moved. This alone was not necessarily alarming. People occasionally became ill in restrooms, but combined with the ongoing investigation into the missing cash, the observation warranted attention. A security supervisor radioed for a guard to check on the occupied stall. The guard arrived at the western corridor restroom at 2:41 and knocked on the stall door, asking if the occupant was all right. Devin, recognizing that his time was up, did not respond immediately. He sat motionless, knowing that any answer would only accelerate the inevitable. The guard knocked again, more forcefully, and identified himself as casino security. When Devin still did not respond, The guard used a master key to unlock the stall door from the outside. What he found inside defied immediate comprehension. Devin Lattimore sat on the closed toilet lid, surrounded by bundles of cash that filled the stall floor nearly to knee height. 3 wooden crates were stacked next to the toilet paper dispenser, their contents clearly visible through partially opened lids, gold bars stamped with assay marks. More cash had been stuffed into the tank behind the toilet, causing water to overflow onto the already crowded floor. The guard backed out of the stall and immediately radioed for additional security and management. Within minutes, the western corridor was flooded with personnel. The casino initiated a full lockdown at 2:53 in the morning, sealing all exits and freezing all gaming operations. Guests were asked to remain where they were, while security assessed what they were calling an emergency situation. Law enforcement was notified, and Las Vegas Metropolitan Police arrived on scene at 3:17, followed shortly by FBI agents from the Bureau's local field office, given that the theft involved a gaming establishment and potentially violated federal statutes. Devin was removed from the restroom and placed in handcuffs. He did not resist or attempt to flee. Security personnel photographed the scene extensively before beginning the careful process of removing and counting the recovered money. The total came to $6.8 million, $6.2 million in bundled currency and $600,000 in gold bullion. Every dollar and every ounce was accounted for, meaning nothing had been removed from the restroom since Devin had placed it there. The investigation into how the money had moved from the secured corridor to the public restroom began immediately. Detectives discovered the modified section of wall within an hour of Devin's arrest, the duct tape and fresh saw marks making the breach obvious once they knew to look for it. Surveillance footage was pulled and reviewed, but the cameras covering the cash corridor and restroom had not captured the actual moment of theft. The corridor cameras were angled to show personnel and cart movements, not the walls themselves. The restroom camera could not see into the stall where Devin had worked. What the footage did show was Devin's movements throughout the night, his routine cleaning pattern, his entry into the western corridor restroom at 1 o'clock, and his failure to emerge for the next 90 minutes. It showed the armored car arrival, the security team escorting cash through the corridor, and the moment when guards realized items were missing from their cart. But it did not show the actual transfer of money through the wall, the critical seconds when Devin had exploited a blind spot in the casino's surveillance architecture. Interviews with security personnel revealed a troubling pattern of complacency. Multiple guards admitted that they had not physically inspected the walls of the cash corridor during their patrols, assuming that the reinforced vault area was the only vulnerable point. Surveillance operators acknowledged that they rarely watched back-of-house camera feeds with the same intensity they applied to gaming floor monitors. The out-of-order sign on the restroom stall had not been questioned or verified. No one had thought to check on the maintenance worker who had been inside a bathroom for over an hour, despite the fact that such behavior was anomalous. The FBI took over the criminal investigation, charging Devin with theft, breaking and entering, and conspiracy. During interrogation, Devin admitted to the theft but insisted he had acted alone. Investigators were skeptical, finding it difficult to believe that a janitor with no criminal history could conceive and execute such a plan without assistance. But as they dug into Devin's background, they found no evidence of co-conspirators, no unusual communications, no financial connections to organized crime. Devin had planned and executed the theft entirely on his own, motivated purely by financial desperation. What puzzled investigators most was Devin's apparent lack of an escape plan. When asked how he intended to remove the money from the casino, Devin had no coherent answer. He admitted that he had not thought beyond the theft itself, that he had been so focused on getting the money into the restroom that he had not fully considered what would happen next. His plan, such as it was, involved hiding the cash somewhere in the casino's vast maintenance areas and gradually removing small amounts over weeks or months. It was a strategy that had virtually no chance of success, and Devon seemed to understand that in retrospect. Forensic analysis of Devon's apartment revealed the tools and materials he had used to practice his wall-cutting technique. Investigators found pieces of drywall with saw marks, empty packaging from the garbage bags and duct tape he had purchased, and a spiral notebook containing observations about security patterns and cash transfer schedules. The notebook made clear that Devon had been planning the theft for at least 8 months, possibly longer. His patience and attention to detail were evident, even if his endgame strategy was fatally flawed. The Desert Monarch Casino faced intense scrutiny in the aftermath of the theft. Gaming regulators conducted a comprehensive audit of the property's security infrastructure, identifying numerous deficiencies beyond the wall breach that Devon had exploited. The casino was cited for insufficient surveillance coverage of cash handling areas, inadequate physical security in corridors adjacent to financial operations, poor training of security personnel, and a lack of protocols for monitoring employee behavior in sensitive zones. The Nevada Gaming Control Board imposed substantial fines and required the casino to implement a complete security overhaul before resuming normal operations. The renovation included reinforcing all walls within 50 feet of cash handling areas with steel plating, installing additional surveillance cameras with overlapping coverage to eliminate blind spots, implementing biometric access controls for all secured zones, and requiring that any employee who remained in a single non-public location for more than 20 minutes be checked on by security. The changes cost the Desert Monarch over $4 million and took 3 months to complete. The casino also terminated several security supervisors and surveillance managers who had been on duty the night of the theft. Devon Lattimore was prosecuted in federal court. His attorney argued for leniency, citing Devon's lack of prior criminal history, his financial desperation, and the fact that all stolen money had been recovered. The prosecution countered that Devon's extensive planning demonstrated clear criminal intent and that his actions had severely damaged public confidence in casino security. In March 2004, Devon pled guilty to federal theft charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. During his incarceration, Devon became a subject of interest to security professionals studying casino theft methodologies. He participated in several interviews with gaming industry consultants, describing his observations and planning process in detail. His case was incorporated into training materials used by casino security departments across the country, serving as an example of how long-term employee observation could identify vulnerabilities that technological systems missed. Devon expressed remorse for his actions, acknowledging that his desperation had led him to make catastrophic decisions that destroyed what little stability he had remaining in his life. The psychological toll of his failed heist was significant. Devon later described the 90 minutes he spent trapped in that restroom stall, surrounded by millions of dollars he could not escape with, as the worst period of his life. He knew almost immediately that his plan had failed, that he had no way to move the money out of the casino without being caught. Yet, he sat there anyway, paralyzed by the enormity of what he had done, unable to think of any alternative. When security finally opened the stall door, he felt a sense of relief mixed with crushing disappointment. The Desert Monarch case exposed a fundamental vulnerability in casino security that extended far beyond Las Vegas. Gaming properties across the country began reassessing their assumptions about employee access and trust. The industry had long focused on preventing guest theft and organized crime infiltration, operating under the assumption that long-term employees who passed background checks posed minimal risk. Devon demonstrated that patient observation over years could yield knowledge more valuable than any inside information or sophisticated technology. The case also highlighted the danger of surveillance complacency. Casinos had invested millions in camera systems and monitoring technology, but those systems were only as effective as the humans operating them. The Desert Monarch's surveillance team had fallen into a pattern of watching what they expected to see: the gaming floor, the cashier cages, the high-limit rooms, while largely ignoring spaces that seemed routine or low risk. Devon had understood this better than the security professionals charged with preventing theft. Security consultants who studied the case noted that Devon's greatest advantage was his invisibility. Over 11 years, he had become part of the casino's infrastructure, no more worthy of scrutiny than the cleaning equipment he pushed through the corridors. Guests did not notice him. Security guards nodded at him out of habit, but did not truly see him. Surveillance operators tracked his movements, but did not analyze them. This social invisibility, combined with his patient observation, created an opportunity that a more obvious criminal could never have exploited. The irony of the Desert Monarch heist was that Devon's plan worked perfectly up until the moment he was trapped by his own success. He had accurately identified the vulnerability, timed his breach perfectly, transferred the money without triggering immediate alarms, and successfully concealed $6.8 million in a public restroom. Where he failed was an understanding that the theft itself was only half the challenge. Getting caught with the money in his possession was inevitable once he chose to remain in the casino. His plan had no viable endgame because he had convinced himself that somehow, through some mechanism he could not quite articulate, he would find a way to complete the crime once the money was secured. The Desert Monarch resumed operations in July 2004, its security systems now among the most advanced in the industry. The casino's management used the theft as a marketing opportunity of sorts, advertising their enhanced protection measures and positioning the property as a leader in gaming security innovation. But the psychological impact on employees and security personnel lasted far longer than the physical renovations. Trust had been broken, and the realization that someone they had worked alongside for over a decade had been systematically studying their vulnerabilities created an atmosphere of suspicion that took years to dissipate. Devon Lattimore was released from federal prison in 2010 after serving 6 years of his 8-year sentence. He returned to Las Vegas but found employment difficult given his criminal record. The stigma of being the Desert Monarch thief followed him everywhere. Potential employers would recognize his name from news coverage or discover his background during routine checks. He applied for over 40 jobs in the first 3 months after his release, receiving only 2 callbacks, both of which ended when his criminal history was discussed. He eventually found work at a small janitorial company that contracted with office buildings and retail centers, nowhere near the gaming industry. The pay was even less than what he had earned at the Desert Monarch, barely $11 an hour, and he worked under constant supervision. His parole officer required monthly check-ins, and the conditions of his supervised release prohibited him from entering any casino property in Nevada. The irony was not lost on Devon that his attempt to escape financial ruin had only deepened it. He now owed restitution fees to the federal government, legal costs from his defense, and had lost over a decade of potential earnings and retirement savings. In interviews conducted after his release, Devon expressed regret not just for the theft itself, but for the wasted years spent planning something that was doomed to fail. He described lying awake in his prison cell, replaying that October night over and over, identifying the moment when he should have walked away. That moment, he came to believe, was long before he ever cut through the wall. It was the moment he first noticed the vulnerability and began entertaining the possibility of theft rather than reporting the security flaw to management. Devon acknowledged that his financial problems, while real and severe, did not justify his actions and that bankruptcy, while humiliating, would have been a far better solution than federal prison. He calculated that if he had simply filed for bankruptcy protection in 2001, he would have emerged debt-free within a few years and maintained his employment, his freedom, and his dignity. Instead, he had gambled everything on a plan that could never succeed and lost absolutely. The Desert Monarch heist remains a case study in the limits of technological security and the persistent value of human observation. Security professionals continue to dissect every aspect of the case, using it as a teaching tool for identifying organizational vulnerabilities. The heist is featured in at least a dozen training programs and security conferences annually, with particular focus on the psychology of long-term employee threat assessment. What made Devin's case particularly instructive was the length of time he spent in preparation. Most employee theft is opportunistic. Someone sees an opening and acts impulsively. Devin's approach was methodical, almost scholarly in its patience. He spent years building mental maps of the casino's operations, identifying patterns that security personnel themselves had stopped noticing. He understood that the most dangerous time for any security system is not during a crisis, but during normal operations, when routine dulls vigilance and familiarity creates blind spots. Casino security experts who analyzed the case identified several key failures that enabled the theft. The first was architectural. The decision to use standard construction materials in walls adjacent to cash handling areas had been a cost-saving measure during the original 1989 build. At the time, designers believed that the vault itself was the only critical hardening point, and that the secured corridor leading to it was protected adequately by cameras and access controls. Devin proved that assumption catastrophically wrong. The second failure was procedural. The Desert Monarch had no protocol requiring security personnel to verify the structural integrity of spaces adjacent to high-value areas. Guards walked through the cash corridor multiple times per shift, but never examined the walls, floors, or ceilings for signs of tampering. The assumption was that any breach would be immediately obvious, loud, or trigger sensors. A patient intruder working with hand tools during periods of ambient noise had never been considered a realistic threat vector. The third failure was cultural. The casino had developed an organizational culture that treated back-of-house employees as essentially invisible. Janitors, maintenance workers, and service staff were subjected to background checks during hiring, but rarely monitored afterward. They were given access to virtually every non-gaming area of the property, often working alone during overnight hours when supervision was minimal. The thinking was that these employees had no direct access to money and therefore posed limited risk. Devin demonstrated that proximity to money mattered more than direct access. It demonstrated that sophisticated alarm systems, extensive camera networks, and armed guards could all be circumvented by someone with patience, knowledge, and the willingness to exploit assumptions. The case forced the gaming industry to reconsider what they were protecting, and, more importantly, who they were protecting it from. The greatest threats were not always sophisticated criminal organizations with advanced technology. Sometimes they were quiet, desperate individuals who had spent years watching and waiting for a single opportunity. Industry-wide changes followed the Desert Monarch incident. The American Gaming Association issued new best practice guidelines for casino construction, requiring reinforced barriers around all cash handling areas and regular structural integrity audits. Surveillance protocols were updated to mandate periodic review of back-of-house camera feeds, with software algorithms developed to flag unusual employee behavior patterns such as extended time in single locations. Employee monitoring systems became more sophisticated, tracking not just clock-in times but movement patterns throughout facilities. Some civil liberties advocates criticize these enhanced monitoring measures as excessive, arguing that they created oppressive work environments where employees were treated as potential criminals. The gaming industry responded that the measures were necessary given the billions of dollars in cash that moved through casinos annually and the demonstrated vulnerabilities that cases like the Desert Monarch had exposed. The debate highlighted the tension between security and privacy that defined post-heist casino operations. The legacy of that October night in 2003 extends beyond casino security. Law enforcement agencies and security consultants across multiple industries have studied the Desert Monarch case, recognizing that the vulnerabilities Devon exploited exist in any environment where routine creates blind spots and familiarity breeds complacency. Banks, museums, jewelry stores, and data centers all shared similar structural assumptions about who posed threats and where defenses needed to be strongest. The lesson was not that security systems were useless, but that they required constant reevaluation, skepticism about assumptions, and recognition that the most dangerous threats often came from inside rather than outside an organization. The human cost of the heist extended beyond Devon's incarceration. Several security personnel who were on duty that night lost their jobs and found themselves effectively blacklisted from casino security work. The surveillance operators who failed to notice Devon's extended restroom occupation faced particularly harsh criticism. One operator, a 28-year-old named Christopher Hayes, left the gaming industry entirely after being terminated, later describing the experience as devastating to his sense of professional competence. He had been watching dozens of screens simultaneously, focusing on areas where money was being handled and guests were gambling, never imagining that a major theft was occurring in a bathroom. The armored car crew that delivered the cash also faced intense scrutiny. Investigators questioned whether any of them had been complicit in the theft, providing Devon with information about transfer timing or security protocols. All crew members passed polygraph examinations and were eventually cleared of wrongdoing, but the suspicion damaged their reputations and careers. The company that employed them implemented new procedures requiring dual verification at every stage of casino deliveries, adding time and cost to every transaction.